What's up guys, I'm Justin Ball and welcome back to the Recording Percussionist, where I show you everything you need to know to get from that beginning stage of looking at a microphone or camera for the very first time to that intermediate stage where you feel confident in your ability to set up, record, and edit an entire recording session all on your own. In the last video, we discussed the two most common types of microphones, as well as the various polar patterns they're capable of. However, there are a lot more microphone specifications you'll see when looking at them for the first time, and it can be pretty overwhelming. So today we'll be exploring terms such as frequency response, sensitivity, signal to noise ratio, max SPL, and impedance. Before we dive in, it's important to understand that a single sound consists of high, low, and mid-range frequencies all happening simultaneously. All of these frequencies work together to create the characteristic texture, tone color, and timbre of sound. To demonstrate this, let's listen to a marimba recording. First, let's listen to the raw recording with all of the frequencies. Now, let's listen to what it sounds like without the high frequencies. Now I'll put those back in and take out the low frequencies. Without going any further, you can clearly hear that without all of the frequencies, it sounds like something's missing, right? All this to say that without the entire frequency spectrum of a particular sound, the timbre and quality will be negatively affected. In the context of microphones, the timbre is determined by the microphone's frequency response. Frequency response tells you the range of frequencies that a microphone can reproduce. The range of highest to lowest by itself is seemingly useless, as even a below average microphone in 2021 has the ability to pick up frequencies higher and lower than what we can hear with our own ears. However, some microphones are more sensitive to high and low frequencies than others, which is what gives each microphone its characteristic timbre of sound. What's more important is the frequency response chart, or graph. This curve, or lack thereof, shows us how sensitive the microphone will be to certain frequencies, determining how the microphone will affect the timbre of the sounds coming in. When reading a frequency response chart, the x-axis represents frequency, measured in hertz. The y-axis measures sound pressure level, measured in decibels SPL. A microphone with flat response is equally sensitive to all frequencies, meaning that there's very little variation from the original sound, making it great for recording acoustic instruments, vocal groups, and orchestras. A microphone with a shaped response will be more sensitive to some frequencies than others, evident by the peaks and valleys within the chart. Microphones with shaped response are designed to enhance or deter certain frequencies, similar to the way that polar patterns affect the capture and rejection of sound. Most mics with shaped response are less sensitive to low frequencies, which helps decrease background noise. They also have something called a presence rise, which is an increased sensitivity to upper mid frequencies from 3000 to 6000 Hz, which improves clarity and gives these mics their characteristic punch. Concerning which frequency response is best, I would prefer a microphone with as flat of a response as possible. However, there's something to be said for the quality of background noise reduction in shaped response microphones. In the first video of this series, I briefly mentioned sound pressure level, or SPL, which measures the resulting air pressure of a sound, for example, a jet engine at 140 decibels SPL. When looking at microphone specs, max SPL tells you the highest sound pressure level that a microphone can handle without audibly distorting. Now, you'd think that as percussionists, this would be super important. Most of the instruments we'll be recording on are, well, loud. However, these days microphones have such high max SPLs that it's really not an issue anymore. But, just in case, for the purposes of percussion recordings, you're looking for anything between 100 and 139 decibels SPL. Now let's talk about signal to noise ratio. I gave a brief demonstration of what this is in the audio recording timeline video, but now let's talk about it in the context of microphones. Both self-noise and signal-to-noise ratio are both critical specs to check out for anyone looking for clean, noise-free recordings. Self-noise is the signal that a microphone produces with no sound source present and is measured in decibels. In general, you want the lowest self-noise value possible. Anything above 24 decibels is too noisy and should definitely be avoided. 16 to 19 is decent, 11 to 15 is great, and anything below 10 is exceptional. An example of a low self-noise microphone is the Rode NT1 I'm speaking into right now, with an ultra-low 4.5 decibel self-noise rating. Signal-to-noise ratio is defined with a reference to a sound pressure level of 94 decibels. You'll learn more about these numbers as well as the Pascal in the future, but for now, when you're looking at mic specs, it's actually not necessary to list both the self-noise and signal-to-noise ratio. The signal-to-noise ratio is the difference in decibels between the level of self-noise and 94 decibels. For example, if the level of self-noise is 6 decibels, the signal-to-noise ratio is 94 minus 6, which is 88 decibels. So they don't necessarily mean the same thing, but one can easily be calculated with the other. You may also notice that dynamic microphones don't ever have a signal-to-noise ratio or self-noise value. Well, this is because there are no active electronics in dynamic microphones. Condenser microphones will have these values because of the phantom power needed to power the microphone and the preamp which amplifies the signal, both of which create a certain level of noise. The last thing I need to mention about noise is that selecting a microphone with low noise won't help you if the preamp you're using is noisy. Low sensitivity microphones need lots of preamp gain, and in some cases the level of noise you're hearing is the result of a noisy preamp, but we'll talk about how to avoid that when we get to the audio interface. Now let's talk about sensitivity. When you see this listed, what it's referring to is the microphone's ability to convert sound pressure into an electrical signal. In other words, how much output the microphone produces when exposed to a given level of sound pressure. As I've mentioned previously, dynamic microphones can handle louder sounds than condenser microphones. Well, to handle louder sounds, they have to be less sensitive to sound. Likewise, condenser microphones are much better at picking up softer sounds than dynamic microphones, because they are more sensitive. What this means is that you'll have to add more gain on your preamps to compensate for less sensitivity. To review, dynamic microphones are less sensitive, resulting in lower volume, which will require more gain. Condenser microphones are more sensitive, resulting in higher volume, which requires less gain. Concerning the numbers you'll see in the mic specs, sometimes you'll see MVPA, which is millivolts per Pascal, but in the US, you'll typically see a negative decibel value. For dynamic microphones, what you're looking for is a value between negative 60 and negative 48 decibels, or 1 to 4 millivolts per Pascal. For condenser mics, negative 42 to negative 60, or 8 to 32 MVPA. Lastly, this measurement is really only important for dynamic microphones, because sensitivity to low amplitudes is not really a concern for condenser mics. Impedance is the amount of resistance a device has to an audio signal, which is measured in ohms, is somewhat complicated, but think of it like draining a bathtub. High impedance means that the hole is smaller. Low impedance means that the hole is larger. Low impedance is what you'll find with microphones these days. There are two types of impedance: output impedance and load impedance. Microphones have output impedance since they'll be sending a signal to another source for processing. The next audio device in line, which is typically the preamp, will have load impedance. Concerning the impedance values in microphones, what we're after is low impedance ranging from 50 to 500 ohms. If you made it this far, check the description for a link to a cheat sheet containing all of the various specs and values discussed in this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned as much today as I did researching this stuff. And if you're digging these videos, be sure to subscribe and check out the next one where I'll walk you through the microphone selection process and how it varies depending on the percussion instrument or instruments you'll be recording. Until then, happy recording.